I never imagined that giving away my winter coat would bring 8 motorcycles roaring to my library doors, or that the shivering child I wrapped in warmth carried secrets that would change everything I thought I knew about family and protection. My name is Elena Kowalski, and I've been the head librarian at Riverside Public Library for 15 years. In all that time, I've seen every kind of person walk through our doors. Young mothers bringing toddlers for story time, teenagers hiding from troubles at home, elderly folks seeking company as much as books. I've helped people fill out job applications, taught computer basics to seniors, and quietly looked the other way when someone needed a warm place to spend a cold afternoon. But I'd never seen anything quite like the girl who appeared outside our doors 3 weeks before Christmas in 2023. Her name, I would later learn, was Natasha Chen, though she told me to call her Nat. She was 12 years old. Though she looked younger, hunger and exhaustion had a way of stealing years from a child's face. Every morning when I arrived at the library at 6:30, there she was, curled against the glass doors like a small, determined sentinel. The first time I saw her, my heart nearly stopped. It was early December, and the morning frost made the concrete steps slippery and treacherous. But there she was, wrapped in a threadbare jacket that was clearly meant for someone much larger, clutching a paperback novel against her chest like it was the most precious thing in the world. Her hair was auburn, though it was hard to tell through the tangles and grime. It fell in waves around a face that should have been bright with childhood mischief, but instead carried the weight of someone who'd learned to expect disappointment. Her sneakers had holes in them, not fashionable, distressing, but actual wear that let the cold December air bite at her feet. I could see her breath making small clouds as she read, her lips moving slightly with the words. "Good morning," I said gently as I approached with my keys. "You're up early." She looked up at me with eyes that were far too cautious for a 12-year-old. They were dark brown, almost black, and held the kind of wariness that comes from being let down too many times. "The library opens at 9, right?" she asked, her voice small but clear. "That's right. Are you waiting for us to open?" She nodded, then looked back down at her book. "I like to read while I wait." I unlocked the doors and disabled the alarm system, then turned back to her. "Would you like to come in and wait somewhere warm? I always get here early to get things ready." For a moment, hope flickered across her face, but then she shook her head. "I don't want to be any trouble." "You wouldn't be trouble at all," I assured her. "I was just about to make some coffee. I could make you some hot chocolate instead." That's when I saw it, the way her whole body seemed to lean toward the warmth spilling out from the open doors, even as her mind told her to be careful. She was fighting between her desperate need for warmth and her learned instinct to not trust adult kindness. "Okay," she whispered finally, "just until you open." That was the beginning. Every morning after that, Nat was there when I arrived. She'd wait politely outside until I offered to let her in. Then she'd curl up in one of the chairs near the children's section with whatever book she'd been reading. She was always gone by evening, though I never saw her leave. I started bringing an extra thermos of hot chocolate, and sometimes a muffin or a sandwich. She always accepted gratefully, but never asked for anything. When I asked where she lived, she'd give vague answers about staying with friends, or that her grandmother was away for a while. It took me a week to realize she was sleeping outside. I was leaving late one evening, around 8 o'clock, when I decided to walk around the building to check that all the exterior lights were working properly. That's when I found the makeshift shelter behind the library's back wall, cardboard boxes flattened and layered to create a barrier against the concrete, a couple of thin blankets that looked like they'd been rescued from a dumpster, a backpack that seemed to contain everything Nat owned in the world. My heart broke completely. The next morning, I gently brought up the subject of where she was staying. Nat's face flushed red, and for a moment I thought she might run. "I'm managing fine," she said quickly. "I don't need help." "Nat, honey, you're 12 years old. You shouldn't have to manage on your own. That's when the story came out, bit by bit, over the course of several days. Nat had been in foster care since she was 10, after her grandmother, who had raised her since she was a baby, was diagnosed with dementia and could no longer care for her. Her father had disappeared when she was small, and her mother had never been in the picture. "Where's your grandmother now?" I asked gently. "She's in a place for people with memory problems," Nat said, not meeting my eyes. "She doesn't remember me anymore." The foster care system had failed her spectacularly. 3 homes in 6 months, each placement ending for different reasons. One family decided they weren't ready for the responsibility. Another had too many other kids and not enough attention to go around. The third family, well, Nat didn't want to talk about why that one ended, but the way she flinched when she mentioned it told me everything I needed to know. "I won't go back," she said firmly when I suggested contacting social services. "I'd rather stay outside than risk another bad home. At least out here, nobody can hurt me except the cold." That statement haunted me for days. A 12-year-old child had decided that sleeping on cardboard behind a building was safer than trusting the system designed to protect her. I started staying later in the evenings, making sure Nat had access to the library's restrooms and water fountains. I brought extra food, claiming I'd made too much dinner again. I even managed to get her some warmer clothes by telling her they were donations that came in the wrong size. Nat was incredibly bright. In the 3 weeks I'd known her, she'd read more books than most adults read in a year. She devoured everything: fantasy novels, biographies, science textbooks that were way above her grade level. When I asked her about school, she explained that she'd been bounced between so many districts that nobody seemed to notice she'd stopped attending. "I learn more here anyway," she said, gesturing around the library. "Books don't lie to you or let you down." The breaking point came during the season's first real snowstorm. It hit on a Wednesday night in mid-December, dropping 6 inches of snow and bringing temperatures down to 15 degrees. I lay awake in my warm bed, thinking about Nat sleeping outside in that weather, and I knew I couldn't let it continue. I arrived at the library at 6 in the morning instead of my usual 6:30. The snow was still falling, and the world was that peculiar kind of quiet that comes with a heavy snowfall. As I rounded the corner to the library's front entrance, my heart nearly stopped. Nat was there, curled against the glass doors as usual, but something was terribly wrong. She wasn't reading. She was just sitting there, her small body shaking violently, her lips blue with cold. The book she'd been carrying was forgotten in her lap, and she was staring straight ahead with the glassy look of someone whose body was shutting down from hypothermia. "Nat!" I called out, rushing toward her. "Oh, honey, no." She tried to respond, but her teeth were chattering so hard she couldn't form words. Her fingers, when I touched them, were like ice. The thin jacket she wore was soaked through with melted snow, providing no warmth at all. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I stripped off my heavy winter coat, a thick, down-filled parka that my late husband had bought me years ago, and wrapped it around her shoulders. It was enormous on her small frame, but it was warm and dry and exactly what she needed. "Come on," I said, helping her to her feet. "Let's get you inside right now." I unlocked the doors with shaking hands and guided Nat to the chair closest to our small space heater. She was still shivering uncontrollably, so I went to the staff kitchen and made the strongest, sweetest hot chocolate I could manage. I also grabbed the emergency blankets we kept in our first aid kit and wrapped them around her over my coat. It took 20 minutes for the shaking to stop. It took another 10 for her to be able to hold the mug of hot chocolate steady in her hands, and it took nearly an hour before she could speak without her teeth chattering. "Thank you," she whispered finally, and that's when the tears started. Not from the cold, not from fear, but from kindness, from the simple human decency of someone caring enough to give up their own warmth to keep her safe. I held her while she cried, this brave little girl who had been fighting so hard to survive on her own. She felt so small in my arms, so fragile, like a bird with broken wings. "You don't have to thank me," I told her. "This is what people do for each other. This is what family does." "I don't have family," she said quietly. "Yes, you do," I replied, and I meant it with everything in me. "You have me." What I didn't know, what I couldn't have possibly imagined, was that Nat did have family. Not the kind that shows up to school plays or birthday parties, but the kind that watches from the shadows and keeps track of their own. I didn't know that her father, Derek Chen, hadn't just disappeared 2 years ago. He died in a construction accident while working with a group of men who considered loyalty more sacred than blood. I didn't know that the motorcycles I'd occasionally noticed parked across the street weren't random bikers looking for trouble. I didn't know that my simple act of kindness, giving my coat to a freezing child, had been witnessed by people who understood exactly what that gesture meant. And I definitely didn't know that by wrapping Nat in my warmth, I had just set in motion events that would bring 8 Iron Wolves motorcycles roaring to my library doors the very next morning. All I knew was that I had a frightened, brilliant little girl in my arms, and I was going to do everything in my power to keep her safe. The world could be cruel and unfair, but it could also be kind. It could also be warm. It could also be full of surprises that come rumbling down the street on Harley-Davidson engines, carrying the kind of protection that most people never see coming. But that's a story for tomorrow morning, when the sound of 8 motorcycles would change everything I thought I knew about who shows up when a child needs saving. Chapter 2. Wolves Protecting Their Pack. I thought the rumbling I heard through my bedroom window that Thursday morning was thunder from another approaching storm. But when I looked outside and saw 8 massive motorcycles lined up like mechanical soldiers in front of my library, I realized that the real storm was just beginning. The sound hit me first, even before I saw them, a deep, rhythmic rumbling that seemed to vibrate through the very foundation of the Riverside Public Library building. It was 6:45 in the morning, 15 minutes before I usually arrived. But I'd been restless all night thinking about Nat and whether she'd stayed warm in my coat. I'd parked across the street as always, but as I stepped out of my car, I froze. 8 Harley-Davidson motorcycles were arranged in a perfect line along the library's front sidewalk, their chrome gleaming in the early morning light. The riders stood beside their machines like sentries, all leather and denim and an unmistakable aura of controlled power. My first instinct was pure terror. In my 15 years as head librarian, I dealt with plenty of challenging situations, but nothing like this. These weren't teenagers looking for trouble or homeless individuals seeking shelter. These were serious men with serious motorcycles, and they were clearly waiting for something or someone. The largest of the group stood directly in front of the library's main entrance. He had to be at least 6 feet 4 inches tall, with shoulders that seemed to span half the doorway. His leather vest was covered in patches and emblems I didn't recognize, and his arms were decorated with intricate tattoos that disappeared under his sleeves. His hair was dark with streaks of gray, pulled back in a ponytail, and his beard was thick and neatly trimmed despite his intimidating appearance. The other patrons arriving for the library's opening were giving the entire area a wide berth. Mrs. Henderson, who came every Thursday for the new romance novels, took one look at the motorcycles and turned around to walk back to her car. A young mother with 2 small children crossed the street rather than walk past the bikers. I clutched my purse tighter and tried to decide whether I should call the police or simply wait in my car until they left. But then I thought about Nat, who might already be waiting behind the building in the cold, and I knew I couldn't abandon her because I was frightened. Taking a deep breath, I started walking toward the library entrance. The bikers noticed me immediately, but instead of being threatening, they actually seemed to straighten up, like soldiers coming to attention. The largest man stepped forward, and I braced myself for confrontation. "Ma'am," he said, his voice surprisingly respectful, "Are you Elena Kowalski?" My blood ran cold. He knew my name. "Yes," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk with you," he continued. "About a little girl who's been staying here." That's when my confusion turned to genuine fear. Had someone reported me for letting Nat shelter in the library? Were these men here to intimidate me into stopping? I thought about all the rules I'd bent, all the library policies I'd quietly ignored to help one frightened child. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said automatically, the lie feeling heavy on my tongue. The man studied my face for a moment, and something that might have been understanding flickered in his dark eyes. "Ma'am, we're not here to cause trouble. We're here because we've been looking for that little girl for a long time, and we want to thank the person who's been taking care of her." Before I could respond, I heard a voice that made my heart skip a beat. "Elena!" I turned to see Nat running toward me from the direction of the parking lot, but she wasn't alone. She was holding hands with another biker, a smaller man with kind eyes and graying temples. She looked completely different from the frightened, half-frozen child I'd found yesterday morning. My coat was still wrapped around her, but underneath it, she was wearing clean clothes I'd never seen before. Her hair had been washed and braided, and for the first time since I'd known her, she was smiling. Actually smiling. "Elena, these are my dad's friends," she said, her voice bright with an excitement I'd never heard before. "They've been looking for me." The large biker stepped forward again, and this time he extended his hand. "Mrs. Kowalski, my name is Victor Rodriguez, but everyone calls me Steel. I'm the president of the Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club, and Derek Chen was one of our brothers." Derek Chen, Nat's father. The man she'd told me had disappeared when she was small. "Derek didn't disappear," Steele continued, reading the confusion on my face. "He died 18 months ago in a construction accident. He was working a job with some of our guys when a scaffolding collapsed. He was killed instantly." I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet, but Nat said, "She didn't know," Steele explained gently. "Child Services never told her the truth. They just said her father was unavailable and placed her with her grandmother. When her grandmother got sick and Nat went into foster care, the system lost track of her completely. We've been searching for her ever since." I looked at Nat, who was standing close to Steele's side, with a trust I'd never seen her show toward any adult. "You knew her father?" "Derek was family," Steele said simply. "Not by blood, but by choice. He worked construction with several of our members, and when he needed help, we were there. When his baby girl needed help, we should have been there too, but the system wouldn't tell us where she was." Another biker stepped forward, this one smaller and older than Steele, with gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I'm Thomas Martinez, but everyone calls me Doc. I'm a licensed social worker, and I've been trying to track Nat through official channels for over a year." "You're a social worker?" I asked, my voice full of disbelief. Doc smiled. "I know it's not what people expect when they see the leather and the motorcycle, but yeah, been working with kids for 20 years. When Derek died, he made Steele promise to look after Nat if anything ever happened to him. We've been trying to honor that promise." Steele's expression grew serious. "Mrs. Kowalski, we know what you've been doing for her. We know you've been letting her sleep behind the building. We know you've been feeding her, buying her clothes, keeping her safe. We've been watching from a distance, making sure no one bothered her, but we didn't want to approach until we were sure she was in good hands." "You've been watching?" I asked, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the December cold. "Not in a creepy way," another biker spoke up. This one was younger, maybe in his 30s, with tattoos covering his neck and hands. "We just wanted to make sure she was safe. We've been taking turns doing drive-bys, especially at night." Steele nodded. "When we saw what happened yesterday morning, when you gave her your coat in the snowstorm, we knew we couldn't wait any longer. Derek's daughter was freezing to death, and the only person who seemed to care was a librarian who was willing to give up her own warmth to save a child. The emotion in his voice caught me off guard. This massive, intimidating man was fighting back tears as he talked about my simple act of kindness. "We brought her to my house last night," Steele continued. "My wife Rachel gave her a hot bath, a warm meal, and a safe bed. But Nat insisted on coming back here this morning because she was worried about you. She was afraid you'd think she'd abandon you." I looked at Nat, who was watching me with anxious eyes. "I would never think that, sweetheart. I was just worried about you." "I know," she said softly. "That's what Steele told me. He said you cared about me like family." "She does," Steele said firmly. "And that's why we're here. Mrs. Kowalski, Derek's daughter, doesn't have any blood relatives who can take care of her. Her grandmother is in memory care and doesn't recognize her anymore. The foster system has failed her 3 times, but she does have us, and she has you." "I don't understand," I said, though part of me was beginning to. Doc stepped forward again. "What Steele is trying to say is that we want to make this official. Several of our members are licensed foster parents. Rachel, Steele's wife, has been wanting to foster again since their own daughter graduated college. But we also know that Nat has formed a bond with you that's important to her healing. We're not trying to take her away from you," Steele said quickly. "We're trying to build something bigger, something that works for her." I felt tears starting to form in my eyes. "What are you proposing?" "Partnership," Steele said simply. "Rachel and I take legal custody through the foster system, but you remain a constant in her life. She spends time at our house, but she also spends time here, with you, in the place where she felt safe. And we all work together to make sure she never falls through the cracks again," Doc added. "No more sleeping outside. No more going hungry. No more being afraid." I looked around at these 8 men, these iron wolves, who had ridden their motorcycles to my library at dawn to talk about the welfare of one 12-year-old girl. They weren't what I had expected. They weren't what anyone would expect. "Why?" I asked. "Why does this matter so much to you?" Steele was quiet for a moment. Then he knelt down so he was at eye level with Nat. "Because your dad made me promise," he said simply. "And because a promise to a brother means everything." He stood back up and looked directly at me. "And because anyone who would give their own coat to a freezing child in a snowstorm is the kind of person we want in our family." Family. There was that word again. "Mrs. Kowalski," Doc said gently, "we know this is a lot to process. We're not asking for an answer right now. We're just asking you to think about it, to think about what might be best for Nat." I looked at the little girl who had changed my life in 3 short weeks. She was standing between Steele and me, holding both our hands, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked like she belonged somewhere. "What do you think, Nat?" I asked. "What do you want?" She looked up at me with those serious dark eyes, then at Steele, then back at me. "I want to stop being scared all the time," she said quietly. "I want to have a real family, and I want you to be part of it." 8 motorcycles. 8 men in leather who had spent months searching for one lost child. 8 unlikely guardians who understood that sometimes family isn't about blood, it's about promises kept and love shared. As I stood there in front of my library, holding hands with a little girl who had taught me about courage and surrounded by people I never would have imagined could become allies, I realized that my quiet, predictable life was about to become something entirely different. Something loud and unexpected, and probably a little bit dangerous. Something that looked exactly like family should look, even if it arrived on Harley-Davidson motorcycles. Chapter 3. The Library Angels. 1 year ago, I thought family meant blood relatives and traditional homes. But as I watched a leather-clad motorcycle club president read "Good Night Moon" to a circle of enchanted children at our winter reading festival, I realized that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that choose each other against all odds. The transformation began immediately after that December morning. when Steele and the Iron Wolves first approached me outside the library. What I expected to be a complicated, bureaucratic nightmare turned into something that restored my faith in both the system and human nature. Within 48 hours, Doc Martinez had navigated the foster care paperwork with the efficiency of someone who understood every loophole and regulation. Steele wasn't exaggerating when he said their chapter was prepared for this. 3 of the Iron Wolves were licensed foster parents, including Rachel Phoenix Murphy, a former Army nurse whose gentle strength reminded me of the best teachers I'd ever known. I met Rachel on the Saturday following that extraordinary Thursday morning. She arrived at the library riding her own motorcycle, a beautiful purple Harley that somehow managed to look both powerful and elegant. She was in her late 40s, with prematurely silver hair that she wore in a practical braid, and hands that showed the careful competence of someone who'd spent years healing others. "I lost my daughter Emma in a car accident 3 years ago," she told me quietly as we watched Nat browse through the young adult section. "She was 16, just getting ready to apply for colleges. After she died, I couldn't imagine opening my heart to another child." "What changed?" I asked. Rachel smiled, and it was the kind of smile that carried both sadness and hope. "Steele told me about a little girl who loved books more than anything in the world, and about a librarian who gave up her own coat to keep that little girl warm. I realized Emma would want me to help other kids who needed a safe place to land." The legal process moved faster than anyone had expected. Rachel's home study had been completed years earlier when she and her husband had considered fostering before Emma's accident. Her background checks were spotless, her references glowing. Most importantly, when the social worker interviewed Nat, it was clear that the connection between them was genuine and strong. But the Iron Wolves didn't stop with simply finding Nat a home. "Elena," Steele said to me one afternoon in January, about 3 weeks after Nat had moved in with Rachel, "we need to talk about something." We were sitting in the library's small conference room, which had become our unofficial meeting place. Nat was at the circulation desk, helping me reorganize the returned books, a task she'd taken on voluntarily and performed with characteristic thoroughness. "Doc's been looking into the library's finances," Steele continued, "and we discovered something concerning." My heart sank. I'd been afraid someone would eventually notice the money I'd been spending from my own pocket. "I can explain." "You don't need to explain anything," Steele interrupted gently. "You've been using your own grocery money to help struggling patrons. You've been paying for children's programs out of your own salary. You bought Nat clothes with money that should have gone to your own bills." I felt my face flush with embarrassment. "The library's budget is tight, and there are always people who need—" "Elena," Steele said, his voice firm but kind, "you're a widow living on a librarian's salary, and you've been running an unofficial social services program out of your own pocket. That's not sustainable." That's when he told me about the fund. The Iron Wolves had pooled their resources, money from their regular jobs, proceeds from their annual charity ride, contributions from local businesses who respected their community work to create what they called the Library Angels Fund. It would support exactly the kind of help I'd been providing: emergency assistance for struggling families, books and supplies for children who couldn't afford them, and resources for people who fell through the system's cracks. "We want you to run it," Steele said. "Officially, the library board has already approved it, and will provide oversight and additional resources as needed." I stared at him in amazement. "You set this up without telling me?" "We wanted to make sure it was done right," he said with a slight smile. "We've got lawyers and accountants in the club too, you know, not just construction workers and mechanics." That was my first real lesson in not judging people by their appearance. Over the following months, I learned that the Iron Wolves included teachers, veterans, social workers, business owners, and even a retired judge. Their leather vests and motorcycles were just one part of who they were. The media attention started in February. A local news reporter had noticed the unusual sight of motorcycles regularly parked outside the Riverside Public Library and decided to investigate. What she found was a story that captured national attention. A motorcycle club working with a small-town librarian to create a safety net for vulnerable children. I was terrified when the first news crew showed up. I'd spent my entire career working quietly behind the scenes, and suddenly there were cameras and microphones everywhere. But Steele and the other Iron Wolves handled the attention with surprising grace and dignity. People see the leather and the motorcycles, and they make assumptions, Steele told the reporter during his first interview. But brotherhood means protecting people who can't protect themselves. It means showing up when someone needs help. Elena Kowalski represents everything we respect: selfless service, quiet heroism, and the courage to do what's right even when no one's watching. The story went viral within days. Suddenly, we were getting calls from libraries across the state, from other motorcycle clubs, and from people who wanted to donate or volunteer. What had started as one librarian helping one child had become something much larger. Elena's Angels, the name the media gave to our program, expanded to 4 other libraries within 6 months. The Iron Wolves used their construction skills to create safe, welcoming reading spaces. Their network of contacts helped connect struggling families with resources they needed. And their presence, 8 motorcycles parked outside a library, sent a clear message that these were places where children were protected and valued. Nat thrived in ways I never could have imagined. Rachel's home was everything a 12-year-old girl needed: warm, stable, and full of love. But Nat also spent significant time at the library with me, helping with programs and continuing to read voraciously. The scared, guarded child who had slept on cardboard behind our building was becoming confident and outgoing. Elena, she said to me one spring afternoon as we were setting up for a children's poetry reading, "Do you think my dad would be proud of what we're doing?" I looked at this remarkable girl who had taught me so much about courage and resilience. "Nat, I think your father would be amazed by who you've become and by the family you've helped create, even though it's not a normal family." I smiled and gestured around the library, where several Iron Wolves were setting up chairs while others helped children choose books for the reading. "Sweetheart, I don't think there's any such thing as a normal family. There are just families that work and families that don't, and this one definitely works." The 1-year anniversary of that first snowy morning arrived before I knew it. We decided to commemorate it with a special winter reading festival, combining it with the library's regular December programming. The main room was packed with families, children, and community members. Several local news crews were there to do follow-up stories on Elena's Angels. But what struck me most was how natural it all felt. Iron Wolves members were scattered throughout the crowd, some reading to small groups of children, others helping set up refreshments, all of them simply part of the community fabric. Nat, now 13 and growing into a confident young woman, was in her element. She moved easily between helping younger children find books and discussing advanced literature with the teenagers. Rachel watched her with the proud smile of a mother, while Steele hovered nearby with the protective stance of a father. Near the end of the evening, as I was helping clean up, Steele approached me. He was wearing his usual leather vest, but over it he had on a formal suit jacket, his compromise between his club identity and the formal nature of the event. "Elena," he said, holding out a small wrapped package, "this is from all of us." Inside was a library card holder made of beautiful tooled leather. Engraved on the front in elegant script were the words, "Honorary Iron Wolf Elena K." I felt tears forming in my eyes. "Steele, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," he replied. "You just need to know that you're family now. Official family." I looked around the room at the scene that had become wonderfully familiar. Former outlaws reading bedtime stories to enchanted children, teenagers getting reading recommendations from tattooed bikers, families from all walks of life coming together in a space that had become truly safe for everyone. "You know what I've learned this year?" I said to Steele, as we watched Nat help a shy 6-year-old pick out his first chapter book. What's that? Family isn't about blood, or traditional structures, or what people expect it to look like. It's about people who show up when you need them most. It's about keeping promises and choosing to love even when it's complicated. Steele nodded, his weathered face soft with emotion. Derek would have loved seeing this. His little girl surrounded by people who care about her, in a place where she's safe and valued. He's seeing it, I said with certainty, and he's proud of all of us. As the evening wound down and families began to leave, I found myself standing in the middle of the library that had become so much more than just a repository for books. It had become a community center, a safe haven, and the heart of an extended family that defied every stereotype and expectation. The Iron Wolves were packing up their sound equipment and folding chairs with the same careful attention they brought to everything they did. Nat was hugging friends goodbye, secure in the knowledge that she had multiple homes and multiple sets of people who loved her unconditionally. 1 year ago, I had been a quiet librarian, living a predictable life, helping people in small, invisible ways. Today, I was part of something loud and unexpected and beautiful, a family that had grown around one frightened child's need for warmth and safety. Sometimes, the most dangerous-looking guardians do have the biggest hearts. Sometimes, thunder-loud motorcycles deliver the gentlest protection. And sometimes, when you give away your coat to keep a child warm, you discover that there are people in the world who understand exactly what that gesture means. People who will ride through snowstorms to make sure no child ever sleeps cold and alone again. People who know that the best families are the ones that choose each other, protect each other, and show up for each other, no matter what the world expects or thinks. People who prove, every single day, that love comes in many forms, but it always sounds like someone saying, "You're family now," and meaning it with their whole heart.